In the vast expanse of Texas ranch country, where fortunes are made and lost on the whims of nature, a young cowboy named Travis Mitchell faced a choice that would haunt him for years to come. Seduced by the promise of wealth and status, he abandoned Sarah, his devoted young bride, for Eleanor Blackwood, a sophisticated widow whose sprawling manor represented everything he thought he wanted. But fate has a way of teaching the hardest lessons to those who choose wrong. As Travis settled into his new life of luxury, Sarah inherited half the county from a distant relative. While his lavish estate began to crumble under mounting debts and drought, he watched helplessly as his first love transformed barren fields into the most prosperous ranch in the territory. What happens when a man realizes that true wealth isn't measured in gold, but in the love he carelessly threw away? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's fingers traced the intricate patterns of her wedding quilt, each stitch a memory sewn into fabric worn soft by time. She'd pieced it together during the long winter evenings before their marriage, when Travis would ride through snow and darkness just to sit beside her father's hearth. The blue squares came from her mother's old dress, the red from Travis's first Christmas gift to her, a shawl he'd traded 3 days' wages to obtain. Travis stood in the doorway of their modest cabin, his shadow long across the wooden floor as evening light filtered through the window. His face held that distant look she'd noticed more often lately, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the Blackwood Manor's chimneys rose above the mesquite trees. "Supper's nearly ready," she said softly, setting aside her mending. "Smells good." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He'd spent the day mending fences on their small piece of land, 20 acres they'd scraped together from 3 years of saving. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, or at least it had been, until the drought began to turn their modest dreams to dust. Sarah moved to the iron stove, lifting the lid on a pot of beans seasoned with the last of their bacon. The familiar aroma filled their one-room home, mingling with the scent of cornbread and the lingering sweetness of the wild roses she'd gathered that morning. Such simple pleasures had always been enough before. "Mr. Henderson offered me extra work breaking those new horses of his," Travis said, washing his hands in the basin by the door. "Might help us get ahead on the mortgage." Sarah nodded, though her heart tightened. Breaking horses was dangerous work, but they needed the money. Their small herd of cattle wasn't enough to keep them afloat, not with the creek running low and grass growing sparse. "Just be careful," she said, setting 2 tin plates on their rough-hewn table. Travis came up behind her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. For a moment, he was fully present again. The man she'd fallen in love with at 16, when he'd been nothing but a ranch hand with dreams as big as the Texas sky. "I always am, aren't I?" He pressed a kiss to her temple, and she leaned into his warmth. Later that night, as crickets sang their evening symphony and a cool breeze stirred the curtains, Sarah watched Travis sleep. The moonlight silvered his features, making him look younger, unburdened. She pulled their wedding quilt higher around his shoulders, each carefully stitched pattern a promise of love and faithfulness. If only she could wrap him in it forever, keep him safe from the restlessness she sensed growing in his heart. But Sarah knew better than most that love couldn't be forced or confined. Like the wild horses Travis would soon be breaking, it had to be given freely, chosen daily. She'd learned that wisdom at her mother's knee, watching her create beauty from scraps, turning necessity into art. That old quilt had been her mother's last gift before consumption took her, and its lessons were sewn into every stitch. Love, patience, endurance. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's hand found Travis's beneath the quilt, his fingers interlaced with hers automatically, a habit born of 1,000 nights. She prayed it would be enough. This simple life they'd built. Together, these small moments of grace. But something in her heart whispered that change was coming, swift and unstoppable as a prairie storm. Eleanor Blackwood's arrival in town caused the kind of stir that only happens when something truly extraordinary disturbs the settled dust of a small Texas community. Her carriage, polished to a mirror shine, rolled down Main Street one Saturday morning, drawn by 4 matched black horses that had every ranch hand in town standing slack-jawed on the boardwalk. Travis was in Hartley's general store when she first crossed his path. He'd just finished haggling over the price of fence wire when the bell above the door chimed. The woman who entered seemed to bring a piece of another world with her, one of silk rustling against hardwood floors and crystal-catching lamplight. She drew out a pearl-handled mirror from her reticule, checking her appearance with the kind of casual grace that spoke of a lifetime's practice. The mirror caught a shaft of sunlight, sending prismatic patterns dancing across the rough-hewn walls. Travis found himself transfixed by the play of light, by the deliberate way she smoothed back a strand of auburn hair that had escaped its elegant coiffure. "I require assistance," she announced to the store at large, her voice carrying the refined accent of someone who'd spent time in Europe. "My estate requires capable men for some rather extensive improvements." Her eyes swept the store, pausing briefly on Travis before moving on. That momentary glance felt like a physical touch. Mr. Hartley practically tripped over himself getting to her. "Mrs. Blackwood, we're honored to have you grace our humble establishment. How may we be of service? The manor's western pasture needs fencing. Good, sturdy work. I pay generously for quality." She turned slightly, and this time her gaze settled firmly on Travis. "You there? You look like you know your way around a ranch. Are you available for hire?" Travis felt the weight of that pearl-handled mirror as she used it to gesture toward him, the morning light making it glow like a beacon. He thought of Sarah at home, of their own fence line needing repair, but Mrs. Blackwood was offering good money, the kind that could make a real difference. "Yes, ma'am," he heard himself say. "Travis Mitchell. I do know my way around ranch. Work." She smiled, and it transformed her face from merely beautiful to something almost ethereal. "Excellent. Come to the manor tomorrow morning. We'll discuss terms." She slipped the mirror back into her reticule, but its gleam seemed to linger in Travis's vision. As she swept out of the store, conversations erupted like summer lightning. Everyone had heard about Eleanor Blackwood, the widow who'd inherited one of the largest spreads in the county. Rumor had it she'd been educated in Paris, had married old money back east, and now, after her husband's passing, had chosen their corner of Texas for reasons nobody quite understood. Travis stood rooted to the spot, the fence wire forgotten. In his hands, he could still smell her perfume, something exotic and expensive that made the store's usual scents of leather and tobacco seem suddenly crude. The mirror's brief flash had illuminated something in him he hadn't known was there, a hunger for more than what his small life with Sarah could offer. That evening, he told Sarah about the job offer over supper, trying to focus on the practical aspects, the good wages, the chance to make connections with wealthy landowners. But his mind kept returning to that mirror, to the way it had captured and transformed the ordinary sunlight into something magnificent. "If you think it's best," Sarah said quietly, serving him another helping of beans. She didn't say what they both knew, that taking work at the manor would mean less time for their own struggling ranch. But they needed the money, and Travis told himself that was reason enough. He couldn't have known then that the simple decision to accept Eleanor Blackwood's offer would set in motion events that would change everything. Like that pearl-handled mirror catching and reflecting light, it would reveal truths about himself he wasn't ready to face, truths that would eventually force him to choose between the life he had and the life he thought he wanted. The crystal decanter caught the late afternoon sun, transforming the amber whiskey within into liquid gold. Travis watched, mesmerized, as Eleanor lifted it with practiced elegance and poured 2 fingers' worth into a heavy-bottomed glass. The Study, where they sat, felt more like a museum than a room meant for living. Leather-bound books lined mahogany shelves, and a Persian carpet muffled his boots' customary creaking. "You've done exceptional work this week, Mr. Mitchell," Eleanor said, extending the glass to him. "I believe in rewarding excellence appropriately." Travis hesitated before accepting. He'd never tasted anything finer than the raw whiskey sold at Thompson's saloon. This was different, smooth as silk against his tongue, warming his chest with gentle heat rather than the familiar burn of cheap spirits. "Thank you, Mrs. Blackwood," he managed, conscious of the dirt under his fingernails against the pristine crystal. "The fence lines coming along well. Should have the western pasture secured by week's end." She smiled, settling into a leather armchair that probably cost more than his entire cabin. "Please call me Eleanor. After all, you've become quite indispensable around here." She poured herself a measure, the decanter's stopper making a musical sound against the crystal neck. "Tell me, Travis, have you ever considered managing a larger operation?" The question caught him off guard. Through the study's tall windows, he could see the sun setting behind the manor's extensive grounds. Somewhere beyond those manicured lawns, Sarah would be finishing up the evening chores alone again. "Can't say that I have, ma'am." "Eleanor," he corrected himself, taking another sip to cover his discomfort. But the truth was, he had been thinking about it. Every day he spent at the manor showed him possibilities he'd never imagined. "You have a natural gift," Eleanor continued, swirling the whiskey in her glass. "It would be a shame to see it wasted on smaller ventures." Her pause spoke volumes about what she thought of his 20 acres. Travis's fingers tightened around the crystal glass. "Sarah and we're doing all right with what we have." "Are you?" Eleanor rose gracefully, moving to a side table where leather-bound ledgers lay open. "I've made inquiries, you know. The bank tells me this drought has hit the smaller ranches particularly hard. Many won't survive another season without intervention." The whiskey's warmth turned cold in Travis's stomach. He and Sarah had been keeping their financial troubles private, or so he'd thought. Eleanor's casual mention of their vulnerability felt like a hand closing around his throat. "I'm offering you an opportunity, Travis." She returned to her chair, closer this time. The scent of her perfume mingled with the rich aroma of the whiskey. "Not just employment, though the salary would be generous, but a chance to be part of something substantial, something lasting." Through the crystal decanter, the world beyond appeared distorted, magnified. Travis could see the stables where 4 grooms tended to Eleanor's horses, the manicured gardens where a dozen workers maintained perfect order, the cattle grazing on endless acres of green pasture kept lush through an elaborate irrigation system. "I'll need to think about it," he said finally, setting down his empty glass with exaggerated care. Eleanor's smile held something both knowing and dangerous. "Of course, but don't think too long. Opportunities, like the finest whiskey, are best appreciated while they're being offered." She lifted the decanter once more. "Another glass?" Travis shook his head and stood, suddenly needing to escape the study's opulent confines. But as he rode home in the gathering darkness, he couldn't shake the memory of that crystal decanter, of how it transformed ordinary light into something extraordinary, just as Eleanor's offer promised to transform his ordinary life into something grander. Sarah was waiting up for him, as she always did. The cabin's familiar warmth should have been comforting, but tonight it felt confining. She took one look at his face and knew something had changed, though she didn't ask what. Instead, she simply poured him a cup of coffee in their chipped enamel mug, the contrast with Eleanor's crystal striking him with unexpected force. That night, Travis dreamed of crystal decanters and endless green pastures, while beside him Sarah lay awake, listening to him murmur names that weren't hers in his sleep. The divorce papers lay on Judge Henderson's oak desk like a coiled rattlesnake, their crisp edges and formal typescript at odds with the magnitude of pain they represented. Travis couldn't look directly at them. instead fixing his gaze on the judge's brass paperweight, watching dust motes dance in the shaft of morning light between them. "Are you certain about this, son?" Judge Henderson's weathered face carried the gravity of a man who'd seen too many marriages dissolve in his courtroom. Marriage isn't something to be cast aside lightly. Travis gripped his hat tighter, knuckles white against the worn felt. "Yes, sir, I'm certain." The words tasted like ashes in his mouth, but Eleanor's promise echoed louder than his conscience. A partnership in the ranch, marriage, a future bigger than anything he'd dared dream. "Very well." The judge's pen scratched across the paper. Each stroke another nail in the coffin of his life with Sarah. "Mrs. Mitchell will need to be served these papers. Do you want the sheriff to—" "No," Travis cut in, too quickly. "I'll tell her myself. She deserves that much." The ride home felt endless. The divorce papers burned in his saddlebag like a brand, their weight far heavier than mere paper should be. The small cabin came into view, smoke rising straight, and, true from the chimney, Sarah would be inside, probably working on her endless mending, humming those old hymns her mother taught her. She looked up when he entered, her smile fading as she read his expression. "Travis." He pulled the papers from his saddlebag, his hands shaking slightly as he placed them on their small table, the same table where they'd shared their first meal. As husband and wife, where they'd planned their future on long winter evenings, where Sarah had nursed him back to health after that bad fall from Old Thunder. "I'm sorry," he managed, the words woefully inadequate. "Eleanor's offered me a partnership, the manor, her hand in marriage, everything." Sarah didn't move to touch the papers. She sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, looking at him, with eyes that held more sorrow than anger. "I see." Her voice was quiet, controlled. "And you've already made your choice." "Sarah, He stopped, realizing any explanation would only make things worse. "The cabin's yours, and I'll make sure you're provided for until—" "Until what, Travis? Until I find another man to take care of me." Now there was steel in her voice. A strength he'd always known was there but had somehow forgotten. "I don't need your provision. I never did." She stood slowly, moving to the window where her mother's quilt hung as a curtain. With deliberate care, she took it down, folded it, and placed it in the trunk at the foot of their bed. Their bed, not his anymore. "Take your papers," she said, still not looking at them. "I'll sign them when the judge calls for me, but don't think you can ease your conscience with promises of provision." Travis wanted to reach for her, to explain how this was for the best, how Eleanor's wealth and connections could lift them both up. But the words died in his throat as Sarah finally turned to face him, her eyes dry, but filled with a dignity that made him feel small. "I hope she gives you everything you think you want, Travis Mitchell." She opened the door, a clear dismissal. "Now please leave." Outside, the afternoon sun felt too bright, accusatory. His horse shifted uneasily, sensing his distress. As he mounted up, he heard Sarah begin to sing, one of her mother's old hymns about faith and perseverance. The sound followed him down the path, each note another reminder of what he was leaving behind. The divorce papers rode in his saddlebag. Like a sentence of guilt, their presence a constant reminder of his choice. But as the manor's grand silhouette appeared on the horizon, Travis forced himself to focus on what lay ahead rather than what he was leaving behind. Eleanor was waiting. After all, with her crystal decanters and Persian carpets and promises of a grander life. He didn't allow himself to look back at the cabin, knowing if he did, he might see Sarah standing in the doorway, straight-backed and strong, watching him ride away from everything they'd built together. Some choices, once made, can never be unmade, and the papers in his saddlebag were proof of that bitter truth. The leather-bound account books in Eleanor's study told a story that Travis wasn't meant to see. He'd discovered them by accident one evening, searching for a land deed among the papers scattered across her mahogany desk. The numbers within made his breath catch. Column after column of red ink, loan documents from banks as far away as Dallas, and promissory notes bearing interest rates that made his palms sweat. "Darling, what are you doing in here?" Eleanor's voice carried a sharp edge beneath its cultured smoothness. She stood in the doorway, elegant as always, in a deep blue dinner dress, but something in her eyes reminded Travis of a cornered coyote. "Just looking for those property lines you mentioned." He closed the ledger carefully, trying to mask his unease. Thought it might help with planning the new cattle drive. Eleanor crossed the room with measured steps, her hand coming to rest possessively on the account book. "You needn't concern yourself with such tedious details. That's what we have Mr. Whitaker for." Ah yes, Mr. Whitaker, the banker who visited with increasing frequency, always closeted away with Eleanor in this very study. Travis had assumed they were discussing expansions, improvements. Now he wondered what else those private meetings entailed. "Speaking of cattle," Eleanor continued smoothly, "I've invited some investors for dinner next week. They're very interested in our operation." She emphasized the word "our" in a way that somehow made Travis feel both included and excluded at the same time. 3 months into their marriage, and he was still learning the intricate dance of manor life. Everything here was wrapped in layers of meaning, from the seating arrangements at dinner to the careful way Eleanor managed their public appearances. Some days he felt more like a prized stallion being shown off than a husband. Later that night, lying in their massive 4-poster bed, Travis stared at the ceiling while Eleanor slept beside him. The silk sheets felt cool against his skin, but he found himself missing the scratch of Sarah's cotton quilts. Sarah, who had never needed account books to hide her true situation, who had faced their poverty with quiet dignity rather than elegant deception. He pushed the thought away. He'd made his choice, and dwelling on the past wouldn't change anything. But those columns of red ink haunted him, mixing with memories of Sarah's face the day he'd handed her the divorce papers. The next morning, Travis rode out to check the northern pastures. The drought had reached here too, despite Eleanor's assurances that their water rights were secure. The grass was yellowing at the edges, and the creek ran lower than it should. For this time of year, a ranch hand approached with his hat in his hands. "Mr. Mitchell, sir, we've got a problem with the pay again. Second month some of us haven't seen our wages." Travis frowned. "I'll speak to Mrs. Blackwood about it." But even as he said the words, those red-inked ledgers flashed in his mind. Back at the manor, he found Eleanor entertaining the banker. Again, their voices drifted through the study door, tense whispers about collateral and extensions. He walked past without stopping, knowing he wouldn't be welcome in that conversation. In their bedroom, Travis opened his personal strongbox, counting out enough cash to cover the ranch hand's wages from his own savings. It wasn't the first time he'd done this, and something told him it wouldn't be the last. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd left Sarah for the promise of wealth, only to find himself secretly paying workers' wages to maintain the illusion of prosperity. That evening, as he watched Eleanor charm their dinner guests with practiced ease, Travis couldn't help but think of Sarah's simple honesty. He'd heard through town gossip that she'd kept their old cabin, refusing his offer of provision. Pride had always been her sin, she used to say with a laugh. Now he wondered if it hadn't been wisdom instead. The account books in the study held more truth than his new wife ever spoke aloud. Each page of red ink was a warning sign he'd chosen to ignore, blinded by crystal decanters and Persian carpets. But even as these doubts crept in, Travis knew he'd tied himself to Eleanor's fate as surely as his signature had severed him from Sarah. Whatever secrets those books held, whatever storm was coming, he would have to weather it by Eleanor's side. The land deed arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a lawyer from Austin who looked decidedly uncomfortable to be delivering such a document to a woman living alone. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, running her fingers over the elaborate script that declared her the owner of half the county's most fertile grazing land. Uncle Matthew, her mother's eccentric brother whom she'd met only twice, had left her everything. "Ma'am," the lawyer cleared his throat, "there are several interested parties who've already made inquiries about purchasing the property. Given your situation, They feel a quick sale would be most advantageous. Sarah carefully refolded the deed, her mother's words echoing in her memory. Land holds truth that money can't buy. She met the lawyer's patronizing gaze steadily. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison, but I won't be selling." His eyebrows shot up. "But surely you can't mean to manage it yourself? A spread that size needs a man's touch." "My father taught me cattle before he taught me cooking," Sarah interrupted quietly. "And my mother showed me that surviving isn't the same as living. I thank you for your concern, but I'll be keeping my uncle's land." After he left, Sarah spread the deed out again, studying the carefully drawn property lines. The drought that had withered her and Travis's dreams on their small plot hadn't touched this land the same way. Uncle Matthew had understood water. His intricate system of wells and windmills had kept the grass green even in the driest years. The next morning, Sarah rode out at dawn to survey her inheritance. The spring-fed creek that formed the property's eastern boundary ran steady and clear, and the rolling hills held patches of buffalo grass that had survived where other grasses failed. But it was the old windmills that captured her attention, dozen of them, their silver vanes catching the morning light like beacons. "Your uncle was clever with water," old Joe, the foreman who'd stayed on after Matthew's death, explained as he rode beside her. "Built cisterns under each windmill, linked them with underground pipes. Even in drought, there's water if you know where to look." Sarah nodded, pieces of a plan already forming in her mind. "Those pipes, could they be extended?" "Reckon so, if you had the money and the know-how." Joe studied her thoughtfully. "Course most folks round here won't want to work for a woman. They'll work for fair wages and respect," Sarah replied, thinking of her mother's quiet strength. "And those who won't can find employment elsewhere." Word spread quickly through the county. The Mitchell woman wasn't selling out, wasn't looking for a new husband to manage her affairs. Instead, she was offering good wages to any man willing to work under a woman's direction. Some laughed, others scoffed, but when the drought tightened its grip and other ranches started laying off hands, Sarah's steady pay and fair treatment began to look more appealing. She hired Miguel Rodriguez first, a skilled carpenter who'd been turned away from the Blackwood Manor for speaking Spanish. He brought his brothers, all experienced ranch hands who understood water and cattle better than most. The Rodriguez family knew secrets of desert agriculture passed down through generations in northern Mexico, ways of preserving moisture, of reading the land's hidden signs. Within months, the ranch began to transform. New windmills rose against the Texas sky, their silver arms reaching out like prayers for rain. The underground pipe system expanded, carrying precious water to distant pastures. Sarah restored her uncle's old forge, and soon the rhythmic ring of hammer on anvil joined the windmill's creaking song. Each evening, Sarah would sit on her porch, the land deed spread across her lap like a map to a future she'd never imagined for herself. She thought of Travis sometimes, up at the manor with his new wife, and felt a curious mix of gratitude and sadness. His betrayal had forced her to find strength she hadn't known she possessed. The hands took to calling her Ms. Sarah, their tone holding respect rather than condescension. She learned their wives' names, their children's birthdays. When Miguel's youngest daughter showed an aptitude for numbers, Sarah taught her bookkeeping. In the evenings, when old Joe's arthritis got too bad for riding, she made him foreman of the home place, valuing his experience too much to let him go. The deed that had seemed like a burden, that first day became something else entirely. Not just a document of ownership, but a testament to possibility. Sarah had discovered that sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as losses, and that the end of one dream often marks the beginning of a better one. The foreclosure notice arrived with the morning mail, its official letterhead stark against the manor's expensive stationery. Travis found it while Eleanor was still abed, her midnight blue silk robe draped across their bedroom chair. His hands trembled as he read the bank's formal warning, 60 days to make good on their outstanding debts or the property would be seized. The irony was bitter as creek water in drought. He'd left Sarah for this life of supposed prosperity, only to watch it crumble like sun-baked clay. Through the study's window, he could see the signs of decline that he'd been trying so hard to ignore. Empty stables where prize horses had once stood, unmended fences marking the boundaries of overgrazed pastures. "I see you found our morning correspondence." Eleanor's voice was cool as she entered the study, already dressed for the day in a gown that must have cost more than a year's worth of cattle. "Mr. Whitaker assured me it's merely a formality. We'll sort it out. Like we sorted out the last 3 notices." Travis couldn't keep the edge from his voice. "Eleanor, we need to face facts. The ranch is bleeding money." She lifted her chin, pride stiffening her spine. "The Blackwood name still carries weight. I've arranged a dinner party for next week. Several potential investors have expressed interest." "Investors?" Travis crumpled the notice in his fist. "We've hosted 6 dinner parties in the last month, served French wine while our ranch hands wait on back wages. This isn't sustainable. Nothing worth having comes easily, darling." Eleanor's smile held a desperate edge. "We merely need to maintain appearances a little longer." "The right connections. Connections won't make it rain," Travis interrupted, gesturing toward the parched landscape beyond the window. "We need real solutions." As if to mock him, a distant mechanical creaking caught his attention. On the horizon, where Sarah's inherited land began, a new windmill rose against the morning sky. Even from here, he could see the silver blades catching sunlight, their steady turning promising water in a thirsty land. Word had been spreading through town about Sarah's success. While other ranches withered under the drought's grip, her pastures stayed green. She'd hired Miguel Rodriguez and his brothers, men Travis had turned away on Eleanor's instructions about maintaining certain standards. Now they were helping transform dead land into living ranch, their generations of desert. Wisdom worth more than all the crystal decanters in Texas. "Perhaps," Eleanor said carefully, watching his face, "we should consider selling the east pasture. It would buy us time to—" "Sell to whom?" Travis's laugh held no humor. "Everyone knows we're in trouble. The only one around here with money to spend is—" He couldn't finish the sentence. The thought of Sarah purchasing Blackwood land was too bitter to voice. Eleanor's face hardened. "I did not marry you to watch my family's legacy dissolve into nothing." The cultured accent slipped, revealing something harder beneath. "Find a way to fix this, Travis. That's what I bought you for, isn't it?" The words hung in the air between them, ugly in their truth. Travis looked down at the crumpled foreclosure notice, remembering another paper he'd handled with similar care. Divorce documents that had traded love for luxury, substance for show. Through the window, he watched another wagon loaded with supplies making its way toward Sarah's ranch. He'd heard she paid her hands on time, in cash, and treated them like family rather than servants. The contrast with their own situation, scraping by on credit and promises, twisted in his gut like a knife. "I'll ride out today," he said finally. "See if I can negotiate with the bank." But they both knew it was futile. The Blackwood name, for all its polish and pretense, had been hollow long before Travis added his own fortunes to its emptiness. The foreclosure notice was just making official what the drought had been trying to tell them all along. You can't feed cattle on pride, and you can't water fields with champagne. As he saddled his horse, Travis caught sight of his reflection in the stable's weathered window glass. He looked like a man caught between two worlds, wearing clothes too fine for real ranch work, but with hands too calloused for manor life. The foreclosure notice rode in his pocket like a final verdict on his choices, while in the distance, the steady turning of Sarah's windmills marked the rhythm of authentic success. The well bucket scraped against dry stone, the hollow sound echoing up like a death knell for the Blackwood Manor. Travis hauled it up anyway, knowing what he'd find, a few inches of muddy water barely worth the effort of drawing. The morning sun hadn't yet crested the horizon, but already the air held the promise of another merciless day. "How bad?" Eleanor's voice startled him. She rarely ventured out this early, preferring to maintain the fiction that the manor ran itself through some combination of money and magic. Bad enough. Travis set the bucket down, its meager contents a mockery of what they needed. Main wells, almost dry. The south one went last week. We've got maybe 3 days of drinking water left, less if we count the cattle. Eleanor's fingers worried at her cameo brooch, a nervous habit she'd developed as their situation worsened. Surely we can dig deeper. My father always said, "Your father's been dead 10 years, Eleanor, and he left the place in worse shape than you led me to believe." The words came out harder than he intended, but months of mounting crisis had worn his diplomacy thin. A cloud of dust on the horizon caught his attention. Through his field glasses, he could make out a caravan of wagons heading toward Sarah's ranch. Word had spread that she was hiring experienced well diggers, offering good wages for those who could help expand her water system. "Perhaps," Eleanor said carefully, "we could approach her about accessing her water supply. Surely she wouldn't refuse." "Don't," Travis cut her off. "Don't finish that thought." The idea of begging water from Sarah after everything sat in his gut like poison, but he couldn't help watching as Sarah's ranch flourished despite the drought. The Mexican techniques Miguel Rodriguez had introduced, underground clay pot irrigation, strategic placement of windbreaks, careful crop rotation, were proving more valuable than all the fancy farming equipment Eleanor had ordered from back east. Through his glasses, Travis could see Sarah herself riding alongside the wagons. She sat a horse the same way she'd always done everything, with quiet confidence and no wasted motion. Her hat was plain straw, not the expensive Stetson he now wore, but she looked more at home in her skin than he'd felt in months. The empty bucket mocked him as he turned back to the manor's immediate problems. They'd sold off half their cattle already, but the remaining herd still needed water. The careful balance of pride and desperation that had kept them afloat was tipping dangerously toward the latter. "We could sell the silver," Eleanor suggested, not for the first time. "The Persian rugs, my mother's jewelry." "Sold already," Travis admitted. "Last month to pay the hands." He didn't add that even that hadn't been enough, that good men had quit rather than work for promises instead of pay. The sound of wooden wheels on the packed earth drew their attention again. Another wagon was passing, this one driven by old Joe, Sarah's foreman. The back was loaded with pipe sections, more materials for her expanding water system. The old man touched his hat. As he passed, a gesture that managed to convey both respect and judgment. "She's doing it all wrong, you know," Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. "All those Mexican workers, those primitive irrigation methods, it's not how things are done." Travis watched the wagon disappear into the shimmering heat. "Seems to me the only wrong way is the one that doesn't work." The empty bucket sat between them like an accusation. Travis remembered the day he'd first arrived at the manor, dazzled by crystal and silver, blind to the rot beneath the shine. Now the drought had stripped away all pretense, revealing the truth as stark as the cracked earth beneath their feet. In the distance, the rhythmic creaking of Sarah's windmills carried on the hot wind. She'd understood something that Travis was only now beginning to grasp, that true wealth wasn't in appearances, but in substance, not in what you could show, but in what you could grow. Eleanor turned back toward the manor, her silk dress incongruous. "Against the dusty yard. I'll speak to Mr. Whitaker again. Perhaps he can arrange another loan." Travis barely heard her, his attention caught by the sight of green pastures beyond their property line. Sarah had done more than survive the drought. She'd learned to thrive in it, turning adversity into opportunity while he'd been polishing. Brass on a sinking ship, the empty bucket would join a growing collection of similar omens, each one marking another step toward the inevitable reckoning that was coming. The only question was whether their pride would outlast their water. The rosewood jewelry box lay open on Eleanor's vanity, its velvet-lined compartments as bare as their dried-up wells. Travis watched his wife's reflection in the attached mirror as she ran her fingers over the empty spaces where fortune had once nestled in gold and gems. Each hollow seemed to hold a memory. The emerald necklace that had paid last month's wages, the diamond brooch sacrificed to repair the south fence, the pearl earrings traded for seed that had withered in the unforgiving ground. "There's nothing left to sell," Eleanor whispered, closing the lid with a finality that echoed through their bedroom. The sound carried the weight of more than just empty drawers. It was the death knell of pretense, of the elaborate fantasy they'd maintained for nearly a year. "The hands are leaving," Travis said, knowing the words would land like physical blows. Miguel Rodriguez offered them work at Sarah's ranch. Steady pay, housing for their families. Eleanor's shoulders stiffened. "The same Miguel Rodriguez you dismissed on my orders. How convenient." Her bitter laugh held no trace of its former musical quality. "Tell me, husband, did you know, when you cast your lot with me, did you know what Sarah would become?" "I didn't know anything," Travis admitted, the truth rough in his throat, "except that I wanted more than I had. Turns out wanting isn't the same as deserving." Through the window, they could see the last wagon pulling away, loaded with the belongings of 3 good families who'd finally chosen security over loyalty. The sight of their departure hit Travis harder than the empty jewelry box. Good ranch hands were worth more than gold in times like these. "Mr. Whitaker will be here tomorrow," Eleanor said, her voice carefully controlled. "He says there might be one last option to save the manor. There's nothing left to mortgage." "No," she agreed, turning to face him. In the harsh morning light, her carefully maintained facade showed cracks, worry lines around her eyes, grey threading through her expensive coiffure. "But there's you." Travis felt his spine stiffen. "What do you mean?" "The bank might consider a new loan if you sign over your rights to the property. Make me sole owner." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Mr. Whitaker seems to think my prospects for remarriage would be better without encumbrances." The word hung between them like poison. Travis thought of the divorce papers he'd handed Sarah, how he'd promised Eleanor's wealth would provide for them both. Now here was Eleanor, offering him the same empty courtesy. "So that's it?" He was surprised by how calm his voice sounded. "Trade one spouse for a better prospect. Seems I've played this scene before. Don't pretend to moral high ground, darling." Eleanor's smile was sharp as a knife. "We both know what this marriage was. I bought your youth and strength. You bought my position and wealth. Now both commodities have depreciated." She turned back to her jewelry box, running one manicured finger along its intricate carvings. "I won't end up like my mother, dying in genteel poverty because she was too proud to adapt. The Blackwood name still means something to the right buyer." Travis looked around their bedroom, seeing it clearly for perhaps the first time. Every surface held some empty symbol of wealth. The jewelry box that had been stripped to pay debts, crystal bottles containing mere drops of French perfume, imported silk sheets too fine for the coarse reality of ranch life. "Keep it," he said, quietly. "The property, the name, whatever's left of the fortune. I won't sign anything tomorrow." Eleanor's reflection showed genuine surprise. "Don't be a fool, Travis. What else do you have?" "Nothing." The admission felt like freedom. "But I'd rather have nothing honest than everything built on lies." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "You know what the difference is between you and Sarah. She inherited land, but you inherited only the idea of it. She builds, you only preserve, and you can't preserve what's already rotted through." The jewelry box sat silent on the vanity, its empty compartments a testament to hollow promises and false dreams. As Travis walked away from the manor house, he felt lighter than he had in months. He had no idea where he would go or what he would do, but at least he wouldn't be playing a part in someone else's story anymore. Behind him, Eleanor closed the jewelry box one final time, the sound like a door shutting on a chapter of both their lives. Whatever came next, they had finally stopped pretending that their marriage had ever been anything more than another kind of transaction. One that, like the empty box, had finally revealed its true worth. Travis sat at the scarred table of his, rented room above Thompson's general store, crumpling yet another failed attempt at a letter to Sarah. The wastebasket overflowed with similar efforts, each one unable to bridge the chasm between what he needed to say and what he had the right to ask. Finally, he smoothed out a fresh sheet of paper and began again. Dear Sarah, there's no proper way to write this letter, no words big enough to hold both apology and request. I've drafted this a dozen times, each version worse than the last. So I'll write it plain, the way you always preferred things. I'm no longer at the manor. Eleanor and I have parted ways. A fitting end to a marriage built on appearances. The drought revealed more than just dry wells. It showed the hollow core of everything I chose over what we built together. I know I have no right to ask anything of you. The time for rights ended the day I handed you those divorce papers. But I've watched how you've transformed your uncle's land, how you've built something real and lasting while I was polishing brass on a sinking ship. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I haven't earned that. What I'm asking for is work, not as the man I pretended to be at the manor, but as the ranch hand I was when you first knew me. I'll take any job, no matter how menial. You've hired men who needed second chances. I'm hoping you might have room for one more. With respect, Travis. He read it over once more, hearing Sarah's voice in his head, pointing out every flaw and pretense. But it was the truest thing he'd written since leaving her, and truth was what he owed her now. The letter felt impossibly light in his hands as he rode out to her ranch the next morning. The changes were even more striking up close. New windmills dotted the landscape like silver sentinels, their steady creaking a hymn of prosperity. Mexican vaqueros tipped their hats as he passed, their manner suggesting they knew exactly who he was and why he'd come. Old Joe sat on the porch of the main house, whittling what looked like a new handle for a branding iron. His weathered face showed neither surprise nor welcome at Travis's approach. "She's not here," the old man said, before Travis could speak. "Rode out to check the north windmill installation." Travis held out the letter. "Would you see that she gets this?" Joe took it with deliberate slowness, studying the plain envelope as if it might contain something dangerous. "Might be better if you delivered it yourself. She's likely to be at the North Ridge till sundown." The suggestion held a challenge that Travis couldn't quite read. "Maybe it's better this way." Maybe. Joe tucked the letter into his shirt pocket. Or maybe a man ought to look in the eyes of someone he's asking favors from. The rebuke stung, but Travis recognized its justice. "The letter will do for now." As he turned his horse, Joe's voice stopped him. "You know what's funny? When you left her, half the county thought she'd fold up like a cheap fan. Sell the inheritance, maybe marry one of them vultures circling with dollar signs in their eyes." The old man's laugh held more pride than humor. "Instead, she built all this. Turns out the only thing she needed was for you to get out of her way." Travis rode away, the truth of those words burning worse than the summer sun. The letter in Joe's pocket felt like both confession and judgment, a poor offering to lay at the feet of the woman he'd once promised to love and protect, who had ended up protecting herself far better than he ever could have. He reined in at the property line, looking back at the sprawling ranch that Sarah had built from her inheritance and insight. The contrast with Eleanor's failing manor couldn't have been starker, where the Blackwood estate suffocated under the weight of tradition and appearance. Sarah's ranch breathed with life and purpose. The letter would reach her by evening, carrying its cargo of humility and hope. Travis touched his hat brim in a gesture of respect, to the land, to the work being done upon it, and most of all to the woman who had transformed loss into legacy. Whether she offered him work or not, he had already learned the lesson he'd most needed. The true worth lay not in what you owned, but in what you built with your own hands and heart. Sarah sat at her father's old desk, Travis's letter laid beside her business ledger like a challenge. The leather-bound book told one story, columns of careful figures showing profit where others found loss, life springing from land everyone else had written off as dead. But the letter spoke of another kind of accounting, one that couldn't be balanced with numbers alone. "What do you make of him?" she asked old Joe, who stood by the window, his silence as familiar as her own thoughts. "Looks beat down," the foreman answered carefully. "Riding a borrowed horse, wearing clothes that have seen better days, different man than the one who went up to the manor." Sarah nodded, turning a page in her ledger. Last month's figures showed another stretch of black ink. Cattle prices up, water systems paying for themselves 3 times over. She'd learned to trust these numbers more than words, especially men's promises. "Miguel says we'll need extra." "Hands for the fall roundup," she said, running her finger down a column of calculations. "The new grass in the north section is ready for grazing. We're expanding faster than we planned." "Truth is," Joe shifted his weight, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots, "we could use someone who knows traditional ranch work. Miguel and his boys are miracle workers with water, but some of the old ways still have their place." Sarah smiled slightly. "Are you arguing in his favor, Joe?" "Just stating facts, ma'am. Man's got to be pretty desperate to come asking work from his ex-wife. That kind of desperate usually means he'll work twice as hard to prove himself." The ledger lay open to next month's projections. Ambitious plans for new windmills, more cattle, expanded grazing routes. Each number represented not just profit but proof that a woman could do more than survive in a man's world, proof that loss could become strength. "His letter mentions Eleanor," Sarah said more to herself than Joe. "Says they've parted ways. News travels fast. She's already entertaining that railroad man from Dallas. Seems the Blackwood name still has some shine, even if the manor's mortgaged to the hilt." Sarah closed the ledger, feeling its solid weight beneath her hands. She'd built something here that was bigger than her hurt, stronger than her memories. Of Travis, the ranch had become a sanctuary for others seeking second chances, Miguel and his family, fleeing prejudice. Old Joe deemed too ancient to be useful. Young Mary in the cookhouse, whose husband's death had left her with 3 children and no prospects. "What would you do?" she asked Joe, knowing his answer would carry the weight of years. "Had a horse." "Once," the old man said, settling into the story like a comfortable chair. "Mean-spirited creature, always fighting the bit. Sold him to a neighbor who needed something fierce. 6 months later, bought him back for half price, broken leg, supposedly worthless. But with proper care, he turned into the finest cutting. Horse I ever owned." He paused, letting the metaphor sink in. Sometimes what looks like going backward is really just coming full circle. Sarah stood, walking to the window. From here, she could see the entire spread. Silver windmills catching the sunset, cattle dotting the green pastures, smoke rising from the bunkhouse where Miguel's family was probably preparing dinner. All of it built on the foundation of her greatest loss. "If I hire him," she said slowly, "it won't be as a favor. He'll start at the bottom, same as anyone else." "Wouldn't expect otherwise, Mom." She returned to the desk, opening the ledger again to the page where she tracked wages. There was space there for another name, another story of redemption. But this one would be different, more personal, more dangerous to her carefully constructed piece. "Tell Miguel I want to see him in the morning," she decided. "We'll need to reorganize the work crews. And Joe?" She looked up at her old friend. "Have Travis report at sunrise. He can start with the south fence line. It needs mending." The ledger's neat columns seemed to approve of her decision, each balanced entry a reminder that even the most complicated equations could be resolved, with patience and careful calculation. She'd built this ranch on second chances. Perhaps it was time to offer one to the man who had unknowingly set her on this path. As Joe left to deliver her message, Sarah ran her fingers over the leather cover of her ledger, feeling the embossed numbers that had become her new language of truth. Travis would have to learn this language too, the honest arithmetic of consequence and redemption, where every debt must be paid in full before new accounts could be opened. The work agreement lay on Sarah's desk, its typed pages stark and businesslike. No flourishes, no elaborate legal language, just clear terms laid out in black and white. Travis stood before her desk, hat in hands, looking more like the ranch hand she'd first fallen in love with than the manor gentleman he'd tried to become. "These are the conditions," Sarah said, her voice level. "You'll work under Miguel Rodriguez's direct supervision. Standard wages, paid weekly. Room and board in the bunkhouse, same as any other hand. No special considerations, no exceptions." Travis nodded, eyes scanning the document. Sarah watched him read, noting how his fingers had already lost their manner softness, returning to the calloused strength of real work. 2 weeks of mending the south fence line had begun the transformation. Article 3 states that any attempt to leverage our previous relationship will result in immediate termination, she continued. "We're not married anymore, Travis. I'm your employer, nothing more." "I understand." His voice was quiet, accepting. "Article 4 covers confidentiality. What you see here, what we're building, it stays here. Eleanor still has friends in the banking houses, and I won't have our methods compromised." Sarah slid the agreement across the desk, along with a pen. The document represented more than just employment terms. It was a boundary line as clear as any fence on her property. She'd spent a week drafting it, each article shaped by hard-earned wisdom and Miguel's practical advice. "There's one more thing." She pulled out a second document. "This is a letter relinquishing any future claim to this property or its assets, regardless of our previous marriage. Sign both." Travis looked up sharply, meeting her eyes for the first time. "You think I'm here to claim part of your success. I think you're here because you have nowhere else to go," Sarah replied evenly. "And that's fine. Everyone here started somewhere similar, but I protect what I've built, Travis, from everyone." He picked up the pen, signing both documents without further hesitation. The scratch of nib against paper echoed in the quiet office, marking another turning point in their complicated history. Sarah took the papers, adding her own signature. "Miguel will show you the new irrigation system we're installing in the North Pasture. Learn it well. It's the future of ranching in these parts." "Sarah," Travis paused at the door. "I know. It doesn't mean much now, but I'm proud of what you've created here. Your pride isn't relevant to our working relationship." She turned to her ledger, a clear dismissal. "Sunrise tomorrow, North Pasture. Don't be late." After he left, Sarah read through the signed agreements again. The terms were fair but strict, designed to protect both her heart and her ranch. Miguel had reviewed them, adding provisions based on his experience with other ranches that had failed. Due to personal entanglements, the documents would be filed away with her other legal papers, but their real power lay in the boundaries they represented. Every person on her ranch had a similar agreement. Clear terms, mutual respect, no room for manipulation or false promises. Through her window, she watched Travis walk toward the bunkhouse, stopping to help one of Miguel's younger brothers with a heavy load of pipe sections. The simple act of assistance, offered without hesitation or expectation, suggested that perhaps he had indeed learned something from his time at the manor. The work agreement's final clause caught her eye: employment subject to periodic review based on performance, attitude, and adherence to ranch principles. She'd added that line last, after long consideration. It left room for growth while maintaining clear expectations, a balance as delicate as the one between drought and abundance that governed their lives. Old Joe appeared in her doorway. "Miguel says the North Pasture crew's ready to start whenever you give the word." Sarah nodded, filing the signed documents in her safe. "Tell them to begin in the morning. And Joe, keep an eye on our new hand. Not because I don't trust him, but because trust, like respect, has to be earned back one day at a time," the old man finished. "Don't worry, Miss Sarah. Man's got a long row to hoe before he gets anywhere near what he lost." Sarah turned back to her work, but her eyes lingered on the safe where the agreements now resided. They were more than just paper and ink. They were the foundation of her new life, the rules that had transformed loss into success. Travis would have to learn to live within their boundaries, just as she had learned to thrive within the boundaries of her own strength. Travis knelt in the rich soil of the North Pasture, his tools laid out before him like a confession. Each one had been issued to him on his first day, Not the ornate, store-bought implements he'd used at the manor, but working tools with history etched into their handles. The worn shovel had helped dig 6 wells under Miguel's guidance. The heavy wrench bore the initials of 3 different ranch hands who'd used it to build windmills. The battered tool belt had been Joe's before arthritis claimed his riding days. "Like this," Miguel demonstrated, showing him how to angle the irrigation pipe just so. "Water finds its own way, but we help it choose the right path." His Spanish accent had grown fainter over the weeks they'd worked together, or perhaps Travis had simply learned to listen better. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the dew as they worked, connecting another section of Sarah's expanding water system. Travis's hands moved with growing certainty, learning the rhythm of real work again. No fancy gloves, no foreman's distance, just calluses earned through honest labor. "You're getting better," Miguel offered, his approval carrying the weight of genuine assessment rather than social nicety. "Starting to understand the land's language again?" Travis nodded, testing a joint connection. At the manor, he'd lost touch with this essential wisdom, the intimate knowledge of soil and water, the conversation between earth and sky that every true rancher needed to understand. Sarah had never lost it. She'd built her entire empire on this fundamental dialogue. Speaking of Sarah, he could see her in the distance, riding the fence line with old Joe. She sat her horse with the same quiet confidence she brought to everything now, her authority as natural as breathing. Some of the hands called her La Jefa, with a respect that no amount of money could buy. "My father would have loved this place," Miguel said, breaking into Travis's thoughts. "He always said the best ranches are built on respect, for the land, for the workers, for the old ways and the new." He paused, tightening a bolt. "She understands that." Travis's tools clinked against each other as he shifted position, each sound a reminder of his new place in the order of things. Last week, he'd watched Sarah handle a dispute between 2 hands with the same careful attention she gave to checking water levels in the wells. No dramatics, no power plays, just clear judgment based on fairness and common sense. "Tell me something," Travis said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "That first day when I turned you away at the manor, why'd you agree to work with me now?" Miguel's smile held no bitterness. "Because here, I'm not working with the man who turned me away. I'm working with the man who's learning to see clearly." He gestured at their tools, scattered around the open pipe trench. "These tools, they don't care about your past. They only know if you're using them right." The truth of those words settled into Travis's bones. Every day, the distance between who he'd been at the manor and who he was becoming grew larger. The tools in his belt counted progress not in dollars or acres, but in honest sweat and completed tasks. A whistle from the ridge caught their attention. Sarah was waving them over, probably to check the new connection's alignment with the main water line. Travis gathered his tools, each one finding its familiar place on his belt. "You know what she did with the profit from last month's cattle sale?" Miguel asked as they walked. "Bought books for my children, hired a teacher to come 3 times a week. Says educated ranch hands are better ranch hands." He shook his head in admiration. "At the manor, they wouldn't even let my family eat in the main house." Travis felt the shame of that memory, but also the hope of redemption through daily labor. His tools knocked against his hip as they climbed the ridge, their weight a comfort rather than a burden. Each day's work with these simple implements brought him closer to the man he should have been all along. Sarah waited at the top, her ledger open against her saddle horn. She nodded as they approached, all business. "Miguel, what's your assessment of the new connection?" "Ask Travis," Miguel replied. "He did most of the work this morning." Her eyes met Travis's, carrying neither warmth nor coldness, just professional attention. "Well?" Travis wiped his hands on his work pants and gave his report, detailed and technical. The tools at his belt witnessed this moment of pure competence, where he was measured not by his past, but by the quality of his present work. For the First time since returning, he felt truly worthy of the second chance he'd been given. The broken fence post had weathered a dozen seasons, its splintered wood telling a story of storms weathered and weight borne. Travis worked in the fading light, carefully fitting the new support beam against the old, making sure the repair would hold. It wasn't just about fixing a fence anymore. Every post on Sarah's ranch stood as testament to something rebuilt, something worth preserving. "That's good work," Sarah's voice startled him. She'd ridden up so quietly he hadn't heard her approach. "Better than tearing it all down and starting new." Travis drove another nail home, understanding she wasn't just talking about the fence. "Sometimes the old foundation is stronger than we think, just needs proper support." She dismounted, coming closer to inspect his handiwork. The setting sun painted everything in shades of gold, reminding him of countless evenings they'd shared in what felt like another lifetime. But this was different. Her scrutiny was professional, measured. "Miguel says you've taken to the new irrigation system well," she said, running her hand along the weathered post. "Says you're teaching some of the younger hands the proper way to read the lay of the land. Learned from the best." Travis secured the final brace. "Your uncle's design is brilliant. Way he worked with the natural slope instead of fighting. It took me weeks to really understand it." Sarah's lips curved slightly. "Took me months, actually." Uncle Matthew's notes were a mess of sketches and half-finished thoughts, but the principles were sound. She paused, watching him work. "Like these fence posts. He always said a proper repair could be stronger than the original structure." Travis tested the post's stability, feeling the old wood and new support move as one. 3 months of honest work had rebuilt more than just fences. His hands had regained their strength, his eyes their ability to read the land's needs. Even his dreams had changed, no longer haunted by crystal decanters and empty promises. "Heard about Eleanor?" Sarah said quietly. "The railroad man moved into the manor last week." "Figured as much." Travis gathered his tools, each one fitting naturally into his belt now. "She'll do better with him. They understand each other." "And you?" Sarah's question hung in the air between them. "Do you understand things better now?" Travis straightened, meeting her eyes in the fading light. "I understand that what looks like strength isn't always. That sometimes the truest power is in knowing how to bend without breaking." He gestured to the repaired fence post. "Like this old wood. It's got scars and weathering, but it's still standing, still doing its job." Sarah nodded slowly, her hand still resting on the post where old and new wood joined. "Miguel wants to promote you to section leader for the North Pasture Project. Says you've earned it. That's his call to make. And yours. Already made it. You start tomorrow." She mounted her horse with fluid grace. "The crew will be waiting. At sunrise. Don't make me regret this, Travis." He watched her ride away, her silhouette strong against the darkening sky. The repaired fence post stood as witness to their exchange, scarred but sturdy, marked by time but made stronger through careful mending. Later that night in the bunkhouse, Travis cleaned his tools with the same attention he'd once given to Eleanor's silver. Miguel's youngest daughter was reading aloud from her new schoolbook, her voice carrying clearly through the evening air. Some of the hands were playing cards, speaking a comfortable mix of English and Spanish. It was a different kind of wealth than he'd found at the manor, one built on respect rather than display, on growth rather than preservation. The fence post he'd repaired would stand through another season, its scars hidden but not erased, its strength renewed through honest work and proper care. Like the ranch itself, like Sarah's patient building of something true and lasting, it was a testament to the power of second chances. Tomorrow, he'd lead his first crew, teaching others what he'd relearned about reading the land's voice and honoring its needs. The responsibility felt right in a way that all his borrowed authority at the manor never had. Here, every promotion was earned through sweat and understanding, every step forward measured in real progress rather than social climbing. The repaired post would hold, he knew, because it had been mended with both skill and respect for what had come before. Some things, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than ever if you took the time to do the work right, and if those involved were willing to trust the process of repair. The flash flood came without warning, turning the usually docile creek into a raging torrent that threatened to destroy everything in its path. Sarah stood on the ridge, her hand unconsciously clutching the small silver locket she always wore, the one containing a faded photograph of two young people who'd once thought love was enough. "Main reservoir's holding," Travis reported, rain dripping from his hat brim. "But the north channel's about to breach. If it goes, we lose the whole irrigation system," Sarah finished. Lightning illuminated the valley, showing them the scale of their crisis. The water management network they'd spent months building was now their greatest vulnerability. Too much water could be just as devastating as too little. "Miguel's crews are reinforcing the western banks," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "But we need someone to manually close the channel gates. If we can divert the flow..." "I'll go." Travis was already moving toward his horse. "Those gates are underwater by now. It's too dangerous." He turned back, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her fingers tighten around the locket. "Sarah, everything you've built is at risk. Let me do this." She wanted to refuse, to order him to stay, but she wasn't his wife anymore. She was his employer, and he was the most capable hand for this task. "Take Rodriguez's oldest boy with you. He knows the system better than anyone." Travis nodded once and was gone, swallowed by the storm's darkness. Sarah forced herself to focus on coordinating the other crews, but her hand kept straying to the locket. She'd worn it every day. Since the divorce, not out of sentiment but as a reminder of both what she'd lost and what she'd gained in the losing. The next hour passed in a blur of urgent messages and critical decisions. The rain seemed determined to undo months of careful work in a single night. Then, through the storm's fury, came the sound she'd been dreading, the crack of timber giving way. "North Channel!" someone shouted. "The main gates collapsed." Sarah spurred her horse toward the sound, heart pounding. Through sheets of rain, she could make out two figures struggling in the churning water, Travis and young Carlos Rodriguez, fighting to secure the broken gate. Without thinking, she pulled the locket from her neck and pressed it into old Joe's hand. "Hold this and get me a rope." Minutes stretched like years as they worked to rescue the men and save the gate. Sarah's world narrowed to the task at hand, barked orders, the strain of rope against wood, the collective grunt of men and women working as one to hold back nature's fury. Finally, the gate held. Travis and Carlos were pulled to safety, both exhausted but alive. As the crew scrambled to reinforce their temporary repairs, Sarah found herself facing Travis in the rain. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen," she said, her voice rough with emotion she couldn't quite suppress. "Learned from the best." His smile was faint but real. "Watching you build all this, it teaches a man about fighting for what matters." Sarah reached for her locket before remembering she'd given it to Joe. Travis noticed the gesture. "You still wear it," he said softly. "Not for the reasons you think." She accepted the locket back from Joe, its silver surface mud-streaked but intact. "It reminds me that sometimes losing everything is just the beginning of finding something better." Dawn found them assessing the damage. The irrigation system had held, thanks to quick action and collective effort. Sarah stood with her crews, the locket once again around her neck, as the sun revealed their rain-soaked world. "Could have lost it all," Miguel said, shaking his head at the high watermarks. "But we didn't," Sarah replied, "because everyone here knows what we're fighting for." She felt Travis's presence beside her, respectfully distant, but somehow closer than he'd been in months. They'd faced this crisis not as former lovers or bitter exes, but as two people committed to protecting something larger than themselves. The locket rested against her collarbone, its weight familiar but different now. The young couple in the photograph couldn't have imagined this moment, standing in the aftermath of a storm, surrounded by people who had become more than workers. having learned that love sometimes speaks loudest through actions rather than words. "Sarah," Travis said quietly, "thank you for trusting me tonight." She turned to face him, seeing in his mud-streaked features the man he'd become rather than the one who had left. Trust, like respect, has to be earned. You're earning it back, one day at a time. The sun broke through the clouds, promising fair weather ahead. Sarah touched the locket once more, acknowledging that sometimes the best things in life are built not on the dreams we begin with, but on the truths we learn along the way. The new ring was nothing like the gaudy band Travis had worn at the manor. Simple silver, hand-forged by Miguel's brother, who'd learned silversmithing from their grandfather. It sat on Sarah's desk between them, catching the morning light like a question, waiting to be answered. "I'm not asking to erase what happened," Travis said quietly, "or to go back to what we were." He remained standing, respecting the boundary of her desk, of her authority. "I'm asking if we can build something new, something honest." Sarah studied him, seeing the changes 6 months of hard work had wrought. The manor's artificial refinement had been replaced by genuine strength, his hands calloused from real labor, his face weathered by sun and purpose rather than worry. "Why now?" she asked, though she already knew. The flood had washed away more than just soil. It had cleared the last barriers between who they'd been and who they'd become. "Because I finally understand what I threw away." Travis met her gaze steadily. "Not just our marriage, but the chance to build something real together. You've shown me what that looks like, leading with wisdom instead of pride, building trust through actions instead of promises." Sarah picked up the ring, feeling its weight. Unlike her first wedding band, this one bore the marks of its making, tiny imperfections that spoke of human craft and care. "The hands have a betting pool, you know," she said, her lips curving slightly, "about whether I'll promote you to full foreman or run you off the ranch. And what odds are they giving?" "Miguel's betting on foreman. Says any man who'd risk his life to save another man's irrigation system has his priorities straight at last." The morning sun streamed through her office window, illuminating the changes time had brought. Her father's old desk now held modern ledgers alongside traditional ranch records. The wall behind her displayed both her uncle's hand-drawn water maps and the new surveys she'd commissioned. Everything spoke of respect for the past while embracing the future. "I've learned something these past months," Sarah continued, turning, the ring in her fingers. "Watching you work your way up from the bottom, never complaining, never expecting special treatment. I've learned that sometimes the longest road is the truest one." Travis nodded, understanding. "Like that fence post. We repaired together. Sometimes what's broken can be mended stronger than before. If both parties are willing to do the work," Sarah agreed. She stood, moving to the window that overlooked her. "There, ranch. The hands respect you now. Not because you're my ex-husband, or because you once lived in the manor, but because you've earned it. That means something. Everything here is earned," Travis said quietly. "That's what makes it real." Sarah turned back to him, the ring catching light in her palm. "If we do this, it won't be like before. We're different people now. I'm not just your wife. I'm the ranch owner, your employer. That doesn't change. I wouldn't want it to." His voice held conviction. "You've built something remarkable here, Sarah. I'm just grateful to be part of it, in whatever way you'll allow." She studied him a moment longer, seeing no trace of the restless ambition that had once driven him to the manor. This was a man who had learned to find dignity in honest work, to take pride in building rather than acquiring. "Miguel's right about the foreman position," she said finally. "The ranch is growing. We need someone who understands both the old ways and the new." "And the ring?" Travis asked softly. Sarah closed her fingers around it, feeling the solid reality of its craftsmanship. "That's a separate question, one that deserves its own answer." She moved from behind the desk, crossing the boundary that had stood between them for so long. "Ask me again, Travis. Not as my employee, but as the man you've become." He took the ring from her open palm, its silver warm from her touch. This time when he spoke, his words held no trace of the grand promises he'd once made, no echo of manor house dreams. "Sarah, will you build with me again? Not just the ranch, but a life, one day at a time, with clear eyes and honest hearts." She held out her hand, not in submission, but in partnership. The ring slid onto her finger, its weight both familiar and new, like coming home to a house that had been renovated in your absence. The foundations the same, but the structure stronger. 1 year later, the photographer from Austin captured more than just an image. He captured a story. The ranch hands gathered on the main house's porch steps, Miguel and his family in the front row, old Joe seated in his favorite chair, his weathered face beaming. Sarah and Travis stood among them, not in front but part of the whole, their renewed wedding rings catching the Texas sun. What the photograph couldn't show was the journey, how a marriage had to crumble before it could be rebuilt. On stronger foundations, how pride had to be stripped away before true partnership could grow. It couldn't capture the sound of the windmills turning in the distance, or the sight of green pastures stretching to the horizon, defying the drought that still plagued their neighbors. The Blackwood Manor had been sold to the railroad. Its crystal, decanters, and Persian carpets scattered to auction houses back east. But here, on land that Sarah had transformed and Travis had helped nurture, a different kind of legacy flourished. The ranch's school now taught both English and Spanish, its students learning to read ledgers alongside learning to read the land. The irrigation system had become a model for other ranches, proof that tradition and innovation could work hand in hand. Sarah kept the old divorce papers in her desk drawer, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as a testament to growth. Beside them lay their new marriage certificate, signed without fanfare one quiet morning in Judge Henderson's office. Their second wedding had been as simple as their first had been elaborate, just the ranch family gathering for a celebration of work and love restored. The photograph would hang in the main house's entry hall, greeting visitors with a truth that Sarah and Travis had learned the hard way, that real wealth isn't measured in acres or banknotes, but in the strength of bonds forged through shared purpose and mutual respect. Their story had become part of ranch legend, whispered around bunkhouse fires. How love could be lost and found again, how the longest trail sometimes led you right back home. In the years to come, people would look at that photograph and see a successful ranch family, but those who knew, who had witnessed the transformation, saw something more. They saw proof that sometimes life's greatest blessings come disguised as losses, and that true love, like the best-tended land, grows richer with proper care and honest labor. The photographer packed away his equipment as the ranch hands returned to their work. Sarah and Travis lingered on the porch, watching their world settle back into its rhythm of purpose and pride. "Was it worth it?" Travis asked quietly. "The long road back?" Sarah's hand found his, their rings touching. "Some things have to be earned twice," she said, "to be appreciated forever." Above them the windmills turned, their silver veins catching light like promises kept, while all around the ranch flourished, a testament to love rebuilt, stronger for having been broken, truer for having been tested by time and trust and truth.